Our discussion topic this morning is asexuality. We're going to examine what it is. Our interest was piqued recently when an interview with potter Barry Brickle was featured on 9 to Noon, and he mentioned that he'd never been interested in sex. In a world that's so entrenched with sexuality, sexual images, novels and movies and advertising based around sexual attraction, the assumption is that all humans are sexual beings. There doesn't appear to be a lot of research done on asexuality, but one Canadian study has estimated that 1% of the population do not have any desire for sexual relationships. Asexuals say they simply do not have any interest in sex, and that it is not a choice like celibacy. They believe asexuality is a legitimate sexual orientation, just like being heterosexual, gay or bisexual. Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this is Chris Coles, who has founded the website Asexuality Aotearoa New Zealand. Good morning to you, Chris.
Good morning.
And on the line from Sydney University is a sexologist, Dr. Patricia Weerakoon, of the Health Department, I think she is based in at Sydney University. Good morning, Patricia.
Good morning. It's the graduate program in sexual health, Sydney University.
Thank you very much. And also with us in the Auckland studio is the Canadian psychology professor Tony Bogart. Actually, I beg your pardon. He is from Brock University in Ontario. And are you in the studio with us, Tony?
I am.
You are, so you're in the country. Great, I've got that straight. Thank you all very much for joining us. Chris, can we start with you? Because you describe yourself as asexual. What is your definition of it?
An asexual is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction. Or put more simply, it's someone who isn't interested in sex or doesn't feel compelled to form sexual relationships with other people.
Are there all different kinds of experience of asexuality?
Oh, absolutely, yes. One of the big dividers, as it were, is between romantic and aromantic asexuals. So the majority of asexuals, even though they don't want a sexual relationship, are interested in having a romantic relationship. They feel romantically attracted to people.
They fall in love.
Yeah, basically.
But without a sex drive or a sexual attraction even attached?
That's right, yes. So they want intimacy and trust and love and all the other things that you can get from a sexual relationship. That they just don't want the sexual component.
And the aromantic experience?
Aromantic, they're not interested in a romantic relationship either.
So they don't have partners and they don't even have the normal feelings of attraction or of falling in love. Normal, I've used it straight away. But at 1%, perhaps I can get away with it. They don't even have that that feeling of a romantic attraction to another.
Right, yes.
And is that you? That's your
me,
experience?
yes.
So what is your story? When were you aware, if you like, that you were asexual?
Well, I think it goes back to when I was 10, when I first heard about the facts of life. And basically this happened in the playground. One of my friend's brothers had, updated him on the facts of life, and he was telling his friends. And it was interesting because some of the boys were really disgusted by this new knowledge that they'd just been given. And some were clearly interested. And I just took it as another fact. And I remember sort of going away and thinking and feeling very strongly that I understood it. It had the ring of truth about it. But I would never have a sexual relationship with someone. Sexual intercourse I just couldn't imagine myself doing it.
And that might not be uncommon, I guess, at that age, but perhaps
Absolutely.
At puberty, where most people are developing physiological as well as psychological and emotional changes. What was happening with you at that time?
Well, basically those feelings remained the same. So all my peers were busily falling in love and fancying people and developing crushes on their peers, and I was not. Basically, I didn't really know what was going on. I couldn't see what was happening.
Did it bother you at any point?
Oh yes, absolutely. And at the age of 14, I had a girlfriend for a brief period of time. And after that experience, I thought, no, this definitely isn't, this isn't for me.
Because?
It didn't feel, there was no attraction from me, it didn't feel right. And so basically I was pretty vocal after that. I would say that I was not going to have a sexual relationship, that, romantic relationships to me seemed stupid. silly. Why was everyone behaving so ridiculously? It seemed as if everyone's IQ had dropped a couple of points. I couldn't make head nor tail of it.
So you were saying everyone else has got it wrong, but I imagine for some people there is that sense that they're the ones that they've got something wrong. Can that happen, and can that be a real problem?
Absolutely. And even though I was very vocal about how I felt, I was the only person saying this. So actually I did feel a freak, for want of a better word. I felt that I was the only person in the world who felt the way I did about sex.
Has that changed over the years?
It changed about 2 years ago when I came across the Avon website. That's the big website in America. And that was a very powerful experience for me, because suddenly, I'd spent 25 years or whatever thinking I was the only person who felt this way, and suddenly there was a community. At that point there was about 1,000 people registered with it that all seemed to be saying something, describing experiences that were similar to me.
Did you ever seek advice, go and see a doctor or see anyone else for an explanation?
No, I didn't actually. I just thought it doesn't feel wrong to me. This is who I am.
What does it mean for your life and for your relationships?
Well, for my life, I'm questioned. You get the questions: do you have a partner? Do you want to have a partner? All that kind of things. And I suppose friendships for me are the most important relationships in my life. I don't have one particular person, a special other, a soulmate as such. So I think that's the...
What a lot of people will ask, I suspect, is, and I'm interested to talk this through with you and with our other guests, is what exactly, is this a distinct state? Because everyone, I think, understands experiences of low libido or going through periods of disinterest in sex. That's a very common experience. Are we talking about the end of a physiological spectrum, if you like, or are you sure that this is a distinct state and that needs to be acknowledged as such?
I feel it's a distinct state that needs to be acknowledged. There is a theory that we're just very low sex drive, hyper low. But my experience and the experiences of lots of other people on the Avon site, it doesn't really bear testament to that.
Is there any sort of physiological or sexual arousal or response going on in many asexuals, or does it vary?
It varies, but some asexuals definitely have a physiological sexual response, but they have no desire to interact in a sexual way with other people.
Does that make one asexual if you're not having sex with others or wanting sex with others, but you're having sexual experiences and the physiological responses? Is that still what you would qualify as asexual?
Yeah, because asexual is a lack of sexual attraction. That's the definition.
And the other obvious question is, physiologically, what is your understanding of what is going on? Because for men in particular, there are very obvious physiological responses that we associate with someone's sexuality. Is that happening for many asexuals, or for some asexuals, or not?
Physiological basis. Personally, I think it's the way I am is hardwired. It's kind of neurological. Other people, when they experience those sensations of sexual arousal, link them up to or project them onto other people. Asexuals don't do that.
Are there asexuals who simply have not even any arousal, absolutely no physiological signs of sexuality?
Yeah, that's the case. Yeah.
Let me bring in here Tony Bogart, who's the Canadian psychology professor who's with us in Auckland. Morning, Tony.
Good morning.
What, from your research or your work, what is known about asexuality?
Not much so far. I did a study in 2004. It was a reanalysis of a British national probability sample, and I defined asexuality very similarly to the way Chris defines it, as a lack of sexual attraction. And I ended up analyzing this particular data set, and as you reported, about 1% of them people in this particular data set indicated that they had felt no sexual attraction to other people. But I also looked at a number of other factors that may predict or may relate to asexuality, and so there were some correlated factors. One was gender. In this particular study, at least, we found that women were more likely than men to report a lack of sexual attraction. We also found that asexual people were slightly more religious, and a few other physical factors as well, confirming that there might be a biological basis, a difference in hardwiring for some people who ultimately will identify as asexual. So some initial research in 2004 and some interesting information, but a lot more work needs to be done on it.
You mentioned the sexual attraction being the key, but as we said, for some there is not even a physiological or a sexual arousal process.
Right.
Is that necessarily a biological matter, or again could it come back to the way the brain's wired, and is it registered as fact?
Well, I think there is a diversity of people who probably ultimately identify as asexual. Some of them are probably people who really don't have much in the way of physiological arousal, erectile response, or vaginal lubrication, for example. But then there's others who probably do have that level of arousal, but just as Chris was suggesting, don't end up attaching that arousal to anyone. And in both cases, there might be physiological basis to it. So I wouldn't suggest that just because you have a distinction between people who have some arousal and those who don't, doesn't necessarily mean that one of them has a physiological basis and one of them doesn't. The physiological basis and the lack of attachment to another person or lack of connection to another person may still be physiological.
What is it that asexuals tell you in research or in studies, if they have been done, about their experience of their lives?
Well, what I did, again, was an archival study, and so I looked at a database that was existing. But I have spoken to a number of asexual people, but I have not done a large-scale interview study. But what I have found out from my archival study and from my conversations with asexual people is very similar to what Chris is suggesting, that many asexual people report really having no sexual interest and no sexual attraction for a very long period of time, ever since they were kids. And some of them are distressed about it, but some of them are not. And also the diversity that Chris was talking about also resonates with what I've, my own sort of personal research and also the archival data that I've
And so
looked at.
some may have romantic
That's right.
feelings and some may not.
That's right. That's right.
Some may have physiological
That's right.
or sexual experiences, but
Right.
not with others. Okay.
And so there is a distinction between, I think, romantic attraction and sexual attraction, and that's been put forward in the literature before, and that certainly resonates with asexual people that I've talked to, but also some of the research that I've done.
And what do we understand about the link between the emotion and the romantic attraction to someone and the sexual attraction? Is it as simple and as one follows the other, as perhaps we assume?
Well, that's interesting. I think for most people it does, but for some people it doesn't. And also, even that distinction is interesting because some researchers have argued that you can have romantic attractions to the same sex, but have sexual attractions to the opposite sex. And so those emotions can be decoupled from sexuality, even in that way. And so this decoupling of romantic and sexual attraction, I think, makes some sense, although for most people, clearly, when you have a romantic attraction for one sex, you also have a sexual attraction, but not necessarily.
Let's bring in Patricia Wedekun here from Sydney University, sexologist there. Hi, Patricia.
Hello.
What is your understanding then, or your definition, if you like, of asexuality?
I've had a wonderful time listening to Tony and Chris. Look, I'm mainly coming from a biological point of view, I guess, because that's my background as a doctor and a sexologist studying sexuality and education. My main, I guess, idea here is that we need to be very clear what sex and sexuality mean, and I'm just concerned that people who have a low sexual desire shouldn't easily be labeled as asexual. And I guess, let me just clarify that a little bit. I guess when we talk of sex, we talk of biological characteristics of male and female. And when we talk about sexuality, we talk of the whole spectrum of the biological sex and gender identity, as well as orientation and erotic feelings, as well as the sexual desire and arousal and reproduction. So it's really about a sexual being, sexuality being a central aspect of being human. And so I just am concerned at the term asexual as almost being, removing that sexuality, which is a central aspect of being a human.
Just hold on to that, because I think I know what you're getting at, and I want to put that to Chris. Even if you don't have a sex drive or sexual attraction to others, you have a sex, you're male.
Yes.
Do you consider yourself as having a sexuality
Yes.
that is broader than that? All right. So when you use the word asexual, you're talking about the sex act and the emotional and physiological aspects of sex, right?
Yes.
Are you happy with that, Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, if as the clear definition of it's a lack of sexual attraction, a lack of sexual drive as asexual. Now, that's a clear definition. Now, my concern there is, and I'm sorry to be sort of dropping all the concerns in here, but they're very real to me, is that a lot of people, male and female, go through these phases of being really low in sexual desire and drive. And I'm just concerned about labels, whether people should, at that time, would consider themselves asexual, or is it only people who've never, ever in their life, like Chris obviously calls himself. Is that what it is, Chris?
Let's put it back to you, Chris, because that is the case. Everyone goes through phases of low sex drive or disinterest in sex, as we discussed. Is there a distinction as far as you're concerned with the asexual?
I think the taking up of the asexual label is entirely up to the individual.
And does it represent something more than acknowledging you have a low sex drive and don't particularly want sex?
I think so, yes.
What more does it represent?
Well, it's a lack of attraction. That's the essence of it.
I mean, in our biology, in our management or therapy of couples or individuals, if a person has low sex drive, never felt sexually attracted to anyone, male or female, and never been distressed by it, we don't label it asexual, but we tell the person, look, as Chris said, it's the lower end of the physiological spectrum. Sexual desire, like any other physiological act or physiological event, would sort of fall under a normal curve. And so there would be some people who are like at the extreme end of low sex drive or no sex drive.
You're talking about therapy for couples there, but what I'm hearing from Chris is that it's not actually necessarily any concern to the asexual.
That's what I mean. Some people just come and say, I have never felt any sex drive and sexual attraction. Is that abnormal? I'm not particularly concerned about it either, because Chris said that there was a time when he felt like a freak. And people do feel like they're freaks if they don't fit into the quote-unquote norm of sexual attraction. And we tell people, look, if it doesn't bother you, if it isn't distressing you, well, that's okay.
Tony Bogart, do you see from your work a distinction between utterly common periods of low libido or low sexual attraction and what we're talking about with the asexuals?
Yeah, I would make a distinction. I agree with Patricia that there probably has to be some level of enduring lack of sexual attraction and lack of sexual desire. And I agree with Patricia in the sense that if someone is not distressed about their lack of interest, their lack of sexual attraction, then we really shouldn't label them as having a clinical or abnormal phenomenon. And I guess I would disagree a little bit with Patricia and suggest that I think within that context, if there is an enduring lack of interest, an enduring lack of attraction, then the label asexual is probably reasonable.
Why does it matter, Chris? Come back to this question of identity. Why have you formed a website, and for you, why is it important that it's acknowledged as an identity?
Because of the isolation that I felt. As I said, I spent 25 years thinking I was the only person in the world who felt the way I did about sexual relationships, and that isn't a very good space to be. And the relief that I felt when I discovered that there were other people who felt the same way that I did, that's what I'm trying to give, an opportunity for people to hear about this subject and potentially to meet with other people who feel the same way.
And often also with matters of sexuality, there is a sense of a need for some sort of pride to be attached, that it's
Yes.
not, I'm off in this little group that's X% of the population.
Absolutely.
Is that important to you as well?
I think so, yeah. So people aren't feeling ashamed or defective about the way that they feel.
Patricia, I get the impression that you don't see it as a distinct state or status, if you like.
Well, I guess where I come from in terms of education, and we run this graduate program which has international students, and one of the things I keep coming across is that a lot of people really don't want to be labeled, and people want to feel part of the community, and you do realize that when you're a minority, you need support, but also labels sometimes can be dangerous. For instance, I was listening to Tony talk about his research and talk about the fact that more females than males talk of absence of sexual desire. And Tony, you're probably really familiar with Rosemary Basson's work on the female sexual response, where she talks about a lot of women do not feel desire, but when they go into sexual activity, can get aroused and be really satisfied with activity. So, again, if those women sort of feel that they should carry a label of asexual, they're really not, because they get aroused and they can really enjoy sex.
But you see, come back to this point, Chris, which is that automatically assumes, if you like, that you should be perhaps having sex. And is this the whole point? That it is, I am this way, and I don't mind telling everyone that I am this way, and it's not just low libido, that's what drives it for you. Do some asexuals take part in sexual activity because they're in a romantic relationship?
Yes. I think probably the majority of asexuals in romantic relationships, they're also in sexual relationships.
And it might not mean
their
anything
partner
to
is sexual.
And it's for their partner.
And it's for their partner, yes.
What is your website for those who'd like to know more?
It's asexuality.org.nz.
Thank you very much for coming in, and the both of you also in the other studio and on the phone for joining us. I've been speaking to Chris Coles, who is the founder of the website Asexuality Aotearoa New Zealand, at that address he's just given us. Also been speaking with Dr. Patricia Wedekoon from Sydney University, a sexologist, and the Canadian psychology professor Tony Bogart from Brock University in Ontario.